when Princess Lyrelai of Zephyria mocks a human's audacity by daring him to survive her planet's legendary trials, she never expects Captain Marcus Chen to not only endure the brutal tests of mind, body, and spirit, but to redefine humanity's place in the galaxy and claim her hand in marriage. What begins as a cruel joke becomes an interstellar revolution, an alliance for the ages, and an unexpected love story that reshapes the fate of the galaxy forever. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Princess Lyrelai of Zephyria floated gracefully through the crystal gardens of her palace, her iridescent blue skin shimmering under the light of twin suns. Her gossamer wings barely moved as she glided between the floating flower pods, followed by a gaggle of noble courtiers who hung on her every word. The princess was known throughout the galaxy for her beauty, her wit, and her particularly cruel sense of humor when it came to the lesser species who dared court her. "Another human has arrived," she announced with a musical laugh that echoed off the crystal formations around them. "This one claims he can prove humanity's worth through our sacred trials. The audacity of these primitive beings never ceases to amuse me." Her chief advisor, Vexian, a tall, angular being with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, fluttered his secondary wings nervously. "Your Highness, perhaps we should simply turn him away. The trials haven't been attempted in over 3 centuries. They were designed for the ancient warrior races, not for these soft creatures." Lyrelai's eyes, brilliant silver orbs that seemed to hold starlight, sparkled with mischief. She had grown bored with the endless parade of suitors from the great houses of the galaxy, all powerful, all predictable, all desperately seeking alliance with the Zephyrian Empire through marriage. But humans? They were nothing more than a recently discovered species from a backwater world called Earth. They had no advanced technology, no psionic abilities, no natural advantages that would make them worthy of even acknowledging. "Oh, but Vexian," she purred, settling onto a crystalline bench that immediately adjusted its temperature to her preference. "Where's the entertainment in simply turning him away? No, I think we shall let this human attempt the trials. It will provide us with some amusement before the next solar convergence." The courtiers tittered among themselves, their various alien forms rippling with what passed for laughter among their species. The trials of Zephyria were legendary. 3 tests of mind, body, and spirit that had been designed by the ancient Zephyrian war priests to identify worthy warriors and leaders. Even among the galaxy's most advanced species, few had ever completed all 3 trials successfully. "But Your Highness," Vexian pressed, his concern evident in the way his skin darkened, "what if, by some impossible chance, he actually succeeds? The ancient laws are clear. Any being who completes the trials may claim a boon from the royal house." Lyrelai waved a dismissive hand, her fingers trailing sparkles of bioluminescent particles. "Then I shall grant him some trinket and send him on his way. But really, Vexian, you worry too much. A human completing the trials?" She threw back her head and laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I'm so confident in the impossibility of such an outcome that I'll make it interesting. If this human somehow manages to survive all 3 trials, which he won't, I'll marry him myself." The garden fell silent, except for the gentle humming of the levitating flora. Even the ambient music that typically accompanied the princess wherever she went seemed to pause in shock. Vexian's forearms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief. "Your Highness, surely you jest. Do I look like I'm jesting?" Lyrelai's voice carried a dangerous edge now, though her smile remained. "Let it be known throughout the palace, throughout the empire if necessary. Princess Lyrelai of the First House of Zephyria has sworn by the light of our twin suns that if the human completes the trials, she will take him as her consort. Recorded in the official logs, Vexian. I want there to be no question of my generosity." As her words echoed through the garden, carrying on quantum frequencies that would spread across the palace within moments, Lyrelai felt a delicious thrill of anticipation. The human would fail spectacularly, providing entertainment for her court and serving as a warning to other upstart species about reaching beyond their station. It was perfect. What she didn't know was that Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps had been listening to every word from his position in the visitor's alcove, where he'd been waiting for his formal audience. His enhanced hearing, AE, military augmentation from his days as a Special Forces operator, had picked up the entire conversation. As he stood there in his simple dress uniform, looking utterly unremarkable by galactic standards, a slow smile spread across his weathered face. The princess had no idea what she'd just gotten herself into. Captain Marcus Chen had seen enough impossible things in his 42 years to know that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. He'd survived 3 wars, 5 assassination attempts, and a marriage that lasted exactly long enough for him to realize he was better off alone. He'd led diplomatic missions to 12 different star systems, and in every single one, he'd been underestimated because of his species' reputation as newcomers to the galactic community. Standing in the visitor's alcove of the Zephyrian Palace, listening to Princess Lyrelai casually wager her hand in marriage on his certain failure, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement. Not because he had any interest in marrying an alien princess, though she was admittedly stunning in a way that transcended species, but because someone had finally presented him with a challenge worthy of his attention. The formal audience chamber was a marvel of Zephyrian architecture, with walls that seemed to be made of solidified light and a ceiling that showed real-time images of distant galaxies. When Marcus was finally announced and escorted into the princess's presence, he took careful note of everything: the positioning of the guards, the subtle energy fields that protected the royal dais, the way the princess's expression shifted from bored disdain to mild curiosity as she studied him. "So," Lyrelai said, her voice carrying easily across the vast chamber despite speaking at normal volume, "you are the human who wishes to attempt our trials. I must admit, you're not what I expected." Marcus knew exactly what she'd expected: some young, arrogant fool pumped full of testosterone and delusions of grandeur. Instead, she was looking at a man who moved with the controlled precision of a professional soldier, whose gray-streaked hair and weathered face spoke of hard-won experience, and whose dark eyes held depths that seemed far older than his apparent age. "Your Highness," Marcus said with a respectful bow that was perfectly calibrated, not subservient but acknowledging her rank without groveling. "I am honored by your willingness to allow me this opportunity. The trials of Zephyria haven't been attempted in 3 centuries, the princess continued, leaning forward slightly on her throne. They were designed to test the ancient warrior races, beings with natural armor, psychic abilities, enhanced physical capabilities. I'm curious, Captain Chen, what makes you believe a human can succeed where so many others have failed?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. The truth was that he'd spent the past 6 months studying everything available about Zephyrian culture, history, and the trials themselves. He'd analyzed the few surviving records, interviewed scholars who had studied the ancient texts, and even spoken with representatives of species who had attempted the trials in the distant past. But more than that, he understood something about the trials that others seemed to miss. "Your Highness, I believe the trials were never really about physical capabilities or natural advantages," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect chamber. "They were about proving one's worth as a potential ally and partner to the Zephyrian people. Physical strength can be augmented, psychic abilities can be taught, but character, that has to be earned." Something flickered in the princess's silver eyes, not quite approval, but perhaps a reassessment. Around the chamber, courtiers whispered among themselves in languages that Marcus's translation implant rendered as various expressions of surprise and speculation. "Interesting perspective," Lyrelai mused. "Very well, human. The trials will begin at dawn tomorrow. The first trial is that of the mind. You will be tested on strategy, logic, and wisdom. The second trial is that of the body. You will face physical challenges that have broken warriors twice your size. The third trial is that of the spirit, a test I will not describe, as its nature must be discovered by the participant." She paused, and her next words carried across the chamber with the weight of a formal proclamation. "And as I have already declared before witnesses, should you complete all 3 trials successfully, I will honor the ancient customs and grant you any boon within my power, including my hand in marriage, should you be foolish enough to desire it." The courtiers fell silent, and Marcus could feel the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon him. He knew that news of this challenge would spread across the galaxy within hours. Humanity's reputation would rise or fall based on his performance in the coming days. "I understand, Your Highness," Marcus replied calmly, "and I accept these terms." As he was escorted to his quarters in the guest wing of the palace, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The princess clearly expected him to be overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd undertaken. What she didn't realize was that Marcus Chen had spent his entire adult life in situations where failure meant death, and he'd developed a rather impressive track record of refusing to die when it was inconvenient. That night, as he prepared for the trials, Marcus received a message on his secure communication device. It was from Admiral Sarah Rodriguez, head of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. "Marcus, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? The entire Galactic Council is talking about some human attempting the Zephyrian trials. Please tell me this isn't some midlife crisis manifesting in spectacularly poor decision-making." Marcus typed back a simple response. "Trust the process, Admiral. Humanity needs a win, and I intend to deliver one." What he didn't mention was that he'd already identified the key to the trials, hidden in a throwaway line in an ancient Zephyrian text he'd discovered in the archives. The trials weren't just tests, they were a conversation, and Marcus Chen had always been very good at conversations, even when they were conducted through challenges that could easily kill him. Dawn on Zephyria was unlike anything Marcus had experienced on dozens of other worlds. The twin suns rose, in perfect synchronization, casting the crystal spires of the capital city in brilliant rainbows of refracted light. As he made his way to the trial chamber of mind, escorted by silent guards whose species he couldn't identify, Marcus felt the familiar calm that always settled over him before a critical mission. The chamber of mind was a spherical room with walls that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. Princess Lirelei was already present, along with what appeared to be the senior members of her court. She was dressed more formally today, in robes that seemed to be woven from captured starlight, and her expression was carefully neutral as she watched Marcus enter. "Captain Chen," she announced, her voice echoing strangely in the spherical space. "The trial of mind will test your strategic thinking, your ability to adapt to unknown circumstances, and your understanding of consequence. In sacrifice, you will face 3 challenges, each more complex than the last. Failure at any stage results in immediate disqualification." The first wall of the chamber suddenly became transparent, revealing what appeared to be a 3-dimensional holographic representation of a space battle. Dozens of ships from various species were engaged in combat around a contested planet, their movements chaotic and seemingly random. "Your first challenge," Lirelei continued, "is to identify the winning strategy in this historical battle. You have access to all sensor data, communication logs, and tactical databases. You must not only determine how the battle was won, but explain why that particular strategy succeeded when 17 previous attempts had failed." Marcus studied the holographic display, his experienced eye immediately picking out patterns that others might miss. This wasn't just a test of tactical knowledge, it was a test of whether he could think like a Zephyrian. He spent 20 minutes analyzing the data, occasionally asking for different viewing angles or specific information about ship capabilities. Finally, he turned to address the princess directly. "Your Highness, this battle wasn't won through superior firepower or brilliant tactics. It was won through sacrifice and trust. The key moment came when the Zephyrian admiral ordered his own flagship to be used as a decoy, knowing it would likely be destroyed. But he also transmitted his complete tactical database to every ship in the Allied fleet, giving up his strategic advantage to ensure that even if he died, the battle could continue to be coordinated effectively." The princess's eyes narrowed slightly. "Continue." The other 17 attempts failed because they relied on traditional command structures and the assumption that victory could be achieved through individual brilliance. This battle was won because your admiral understood that sometimes a leader must be willing to make themselves expendable for the greater good, and more importantly, They must trust others to carry on in their absence. A ripple of something, surprise? Approval, passed through the assembled courtiers. Lorelei nodded slowly. Correct, the second challenge. The chamber's walls shifted, and suddenly Marcus found himself looking at what appeared to be a complex diplomatic scenario involving 5 different species, each with competing interests in a resource-rich star system. Trade agreements, territorial disputes, and historical grievances created a web of interconnected problems that had apparently resisted solution for decades. Your task, the princess announced, is to propose a solution that all 5 parties can accept, keeps the peace, and establishes a framework for future cooperation. Previous diplomatic attempts have resulted in 2 wars and a trade embargo that damaged all parties involved. Marcus studied the scenario for almost an hour, asking detailed questions about each species' culture, history, and true motivations, versus their stated positions. The key, he realized, was recognizing that none of the 5 parties actually wanted what they were demanding. They were all negotiating from positions of fear and perceived weakness. The solution isn't to give each party what they're asking for, he finally announced. It's to address what they're actually afraid of losing. The hegemony doesn't really want exclusive mining rights. They want assurance that their economy won't collapse if market conditions change. The consortium isn't really concerned about territorial boundaries. They're worried about being cut off from their traditional trade routes. He outlined a comprehensive solution that involved creating a joint economic zone with shared resources, rotating administrative responsibilities, and built-in safeguards that addressed each species' core concerns rather than their stated demands. It was elegant in its simplicity and radical in its approach to interspecies cooperation. The princess was silent for a long moment after he finished. That solution, she said finally, is remarkably similar to one proposed by our greatest diplomatic minds. It took them 3 years to develop. You reached the same conclusion in 1 hour. Sometimes an outside perspective helps, Your Highness, Marcus replied. When you're not invested in the historical grievances, it's easier to see the common ground. Indeed. The princess's expression was unreadable. The final challenge of the mind. The chamber walls went completely black, and then Marcus found himself looking at what appeared to be a perfect replica of the throne room where he'd first met the princess. But something was wrong. The details were too sharp, the colors too vivid, and when he looked closely he could see subtle inconsistencies in the architecture. This challenge, Lorelei's voice said, though he couldn't see her anymore, is simple in concept but complex in execution. You must determine what is real and what is illusion, and then explain how you reached your conclusion. Be warned. Making. The wrong choice has consequences beyond mere failure of the trial. Marcus understood immediately that this was the real test. The previous 2 challenges had been about knowledge and reasoning, but this was about judgment under pressure and the ability to trust his own perceptions over external evidence. He spent several minutes examining every detail of the false throne room, noting the subtle ways it differed from his memories. But then he realized that the test wasn't really about identifying the illusion. It was about understanding why the illusion had been created in the first place. Your Highness, he said, speaking to the darkness around him. The illusion isn't the test. The test is whether I can recognize that sometimes reality is less important than truth. This false throne room is perfect because it represents how you want to be seen, powerful, untouchable, in complete control. But the real throne room has small imperfections, wear patterns from centuries of use, subtle signs that it's inhabited by people who make mistakes and face real challenges. The darkness cleared and he found himself back in the actual chamber of mind, facing Princess Lorelei, whose expression had shifted from neutral observation to something approaching surprise. The question isn't which version is real, Marcus continued. The question is which version serves the greater truth. And the truth is that perfection is an illusion, but authenticity is valuable beyond measure. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Princess Lorelei stood from her observation throne and walked down to stand directly in front of Marcus, her silver eyes studying his face intently. Captain Chen, she said, and for the first time, Her voice carried a note of genuine respect. "You have passed the trial of mind. I confess that you have exceeded my expectations." As the courtiers murmured among themselves in various alien languages, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. One trial down, 2 to go. And based on the way the princess was looking at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time, he suspected that his original assessment had been correct. These trials weren't really about testing his capabilities. They were about proving that humanity deserved to be taken seriously on the galactic stage. And judging by the expression on Princess Lyrelai's face, that message was starting to get through. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The trial of body took place in what the Zephyrians called the Crucible, a massive arena that could reshape itself to present any physical challenge imaginable. As Marcus stood at the entrance, studying the shifting walls and floating platforms that reconfigured themselves every few seconds, he understood that this trial would be fundamentally different from the cerebral challenges he'd faced the day before. Princess Lyrelai stood in the royal viewing box, no longer lounging casually but leaning forward with evident interest. Word of his success in the trial of mind had spread throughout the palace, and the viewing galleries were packed with courtiers, diplomats, and what appeared to be representatives from dozens of different species. Marcus could feel the weight of their attention, but more importantly, he could sense their skepticism. "The trial of body," the princess announced, her voice amplified throughout the arena, "consists of 3 physical challenges that will test your strength, endurance, agility, and ability to adapt to hostile environments. These challenges have been the downfall of warriors from the galaxy's most physically impressive species. Captain Chen, are you prepared to begin?" Marcus had spent the previous evening in meditation and physical preparation, but he knew that no amount of training could fully prepare him for what was to come. The Zephyrian trials had been designed for beings with natural advantages that humans simply didn't possess. Species with natural armor, enhanced strength, or the ability to survive in environments that would kill an unprotected human in seconds. "I'm ready, Your Highness," he replied, and meant it. The first challenge materialized around him as the arena floor suddenly dropped away, leaving him standing on a narrow beam suspended over what appeared to be a pit of molten lava. The beam began to move, rotating and shifting position while obstacle after obstacle appeared in his path. Spinning blades, jets of superheated steam, and sections that would retract into the walls without warning. But Marcus had spent years training in zero-gravity environments and hostile conditions. As he began to navigate the shifting obstacle course, he drew on muscle memory from a dozen different specialized training programs. The key wasn't to fight the movement of the beam, but to flow with it, using its momentum to carry him past obstacles that would be impossible to overcome through brute force alone. Halfway through the course, he realized that the challenge was as much mental as physical. The obstacles followed patterns, complex ones but patterns nonetheless. Once he identified the underlying rhythm, he could anticipate changes and position himself accordingly. It took him 18 minutes to complete the course, and when he finally reached the stable platform at the end, he could hear surprised murmurs from the viewing galleries. "Impressive," Princess Lyrelai called down to him. "Most beings attempt to power through that challenge using raw strength. You chose to work with the course rather than against it. The second challenge awaits." The arena transformed again, and Marcus found himself in what appeared to be a vast underwater environment, complete with crushing pressure and hostile marine life that seemed designed by a nightmare. His environmental suit provided life support, but it was bulky and limited his mobility. The challenge was to retrieve 3 artifacts from different locations in the underwater maze while avoiding or neutralizing the various predators that called it home. This challenge was about more than physical capability. It was about problem-solving under extreme stress. Marcus quickly realized that the predators weren't randomly aggressive. They were protecting territory and resources. Instead of fighting them, he began to study their behavioral patterns, using his knowledge of Earth's marine life to predict how these alien creatures might react to different stimuli. By the time he emerged with all 3 artifacts, He had managed to complete the challenge without seriously injuring any of the creatures, using distraction and misdirection instead of violence. The viewing galleries had grown noticeably quieter, and when Marcus looked up at the royal box, he saw that Princess Lyrelei was now standing at the railing, her full attention focused on him. "The final physical challenge," she announced, and there was something different in her voice. Not quite respect, but certainly a new level of attention. "This one is unique. You will face an opponent in single combat, but your opponent will be chosen based on your performance in the previous challenges. The arena's artificial intelligence has been analyzing your capabilities and will select an adversary designed to test your limits." The arena around Marcus shifted one final time, creating a circular combat space with various weapons mounted on the walls. As he studied the available options, swords, staves, energy weapons, and devices he couldn't identify, a section of the opposite wall opened, and his opponent entered. It was another human. The figure that walked into the arena was identical to Marcus in every way. Same height, same build, same weathered features and gray-streaked hair. But there was something fundamentally different about its eyes. They held no warmth, no humanity, only cold calculation. "Your opponent," Princess Lyrelei's voice echoed through the arena, "is a perfect physical duplicate of yourself, enhanced with the combined combat knowledge of every warrior who has ever attempted these trials. It knows every fighting style, every tactical approach, every weakness that previous challengers have displayed. In essence, Captain Chen, you must defeat the ultimate version of yourself." Marcus understood immediately why this was the final, physical challenge. It wasn't about strength or speed or endurance, it was about confronting your own limitations and finding a way to transcend them. As he and his duplicate circled each other in the center of the arena, both moving with identical precision, Marcus realized that conventional combat would result in stalemate at best. The fight that followed was unlike anything the assembled viewers had ever witnessed. Two identical figures moved in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's attacks, countering every strategy with identical tactics. For 20 minutes, neither combatant gained a meaningful advantage. The duplicate had superior knowledge and enhanced capabilities, but Marcus had something it couldn't replicate: the ability to think beyond the parameters of the challenge itself. Finally, Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stopped fighting. In the middle of a complex exchange of strikes and counterstrikes, he simply stepped back, lowered his weapons, and spoke directly to his opponent. "I know what you are, and I know why you were created. But I also know something you don't. This trial isn't about proving I can defeat the ultimate warrior. It's about proving I understand when not to fight." The duplicate paused, its artificial intelligence processing this unexpected development. In that moment of hesitation, Marcus continued. "The trial of body isn't really about physical superiority. It's about understanding the relationship between strength and wisdom, between capability and judgment. You represent everything I could become if I focus solely on being the perfect weapon. But that's not who I choose to be." He set down his weapons and walked toward his duplicate, hands open and non-threatening. "You are my potential, but I'm more than my potential. I am my choices, my mistakes, my relationships with others, my willingness to be vulnerable, and that's something you can never truly replicate." The duplicate stood motionless for a long moment, its artificial intelligence clearly struggling with parameters it had never encountered before. Then, slowly, it nodded once and dissolved into light particles that faded away. The arena fell completely silent. Marcus looked up at the royal viewing box to see Princess Lyrelei staring down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. When she finally spoke, her voice carried throughout the arena with perfect clarity. "Captain Marcus Chen of Earth," she announced formally, "you have passed the trial of body, not through superior strength or skill, but through superior understanding of what true strength means." As the courtiers erupted in discussion and the viewing galleries buzzed with excitement, Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not because he had won, but because he had proven something important, not just about himself, but about humanity as a whole. 2 trials down, 1 to go, and based on the way Princess Lyrelai was looking at him now, with something that might have been the beginning of genuine regard, Marcus suspected that the final trial would be the most challenging yet. The 3rd day dawned gray and overcast, a rarity on Zephyria that seemed to reflect the solemnity of what was to come. Marcus had been awakened before sunrise by a delegation of Zephyrian priests, ancient beings whose names were written in languages that predated galactic civilization. They escorted him not to another arena or testing chamber, but to a simple room at the very heart of the palace, a circular chamber with walls of polished black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Princess Lyrelai was already there, but she was not alone. Standing beside her was an elderly Zephyrian whose presence seemed to make the very air shimmer with barely contained power. Marcus recognized him from historical texts, High Priest Valdris, the last surviving member of the order that had created the trials themselves thousands of years ago. Captain Chen, the High Priest said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. The trial of spirit is unlike the challenges you have faced. It cannot be overcome through intelligence or physical prowess, for it takes place not in the external world, but within the depths of your own soul. Marcus nodded, having expected something like this. Every culture in the galaxy had some version of a spiritual trial, though the methods varied wildly. Some involved hallucinogenic substances, others required meditation lasting for days, and a few demanded facing literal manifestations of one's inner demons. The process is simple, Valdris continued, gesturing toward a raised platform in the center of the chamber. You will be connected to the Zephyrian collective consciousness, every mind that has ever lived on our world, stretching back to the dawn of our civilization. In that connection, you will face 3 spiritual challenges. But be warned. Failure in the realm of spirit can damage not just your chances of success, but your very identity. Some who have attempted this trial have emerged changed. Princess Lyrelai stepped forward, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, she looked genuinely concerned. Captain Chen, I feel compelled to tell you that no being from outside our species has ever successfully completed the trial of spirit. The connection to our collective consciousness has proven overwhelming to alien minds. You could withdraw. Now with honor, you have already accomplished more than anyone expected. Marcus studied her face, seeing something in her silver eyes that hadn't been there before. Was it worry? For him? Your Highness, may I ask why you're giving me the option to withdraw? Yesterday you seemed quite confident that I would fail spectacularly. A faint flush colored the princess's iridescent cheeks. Yesterday I believed I knew what humanity was capable of. Today I find my assumptions have been challenged. I would not see you come to harm because of my thoughtless wager. The admission hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted in their dynamic. She was no longer the bored princess amusing herself with the antics of a primitive species. She was someone who had begun to see him as a person worthy of respect, and possibly more than that. I appreciate your concern, Your Highness, Marcus replied formally. But I didn't come this far to turn back at the final hurdle. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I'm curious to see what a Zephyrian collective consciousness looks like from the inside. High Priest Valdris gestured for Marcus to lie down on the platform, which was inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. The connection will be established gradually, he explained as he began to activate ancient technological devices that hummed with barely contained energy. You will first experience echoes of our past, then face challenges drawn from the deepest wisdom of our people. Remember, in the realm of spirit, truth is more important than fact, and authenticity more valuable than perfection. As the connection began to form, Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation that started in his fingertips and gradually spread throughout his body. The chamber around him began to fade, replaced by something vast and incomprehensible. The accumulated experiences, memories, and wisdom of an entire species stretching back millions of years. The first challenge materialized around him as a scene from ancient Zephyria, during the Great War that had nearly destroyed their civilization. He found himself in the position of a young Zephyrian commander, forced to choose between saving his own people and protecting civilian refugees from an enemy species. The ethical weight of the decision was crushing. Every choice led to death and suffering with no clear path to righteousness. But Marcus realized that the challenge wasn't about making the correct choice. It was about accepting the burden of leadership and the responsibility that came with making impossible decisions. He chose to protect the refugees, knowing it would likely doom his own forces, because sometimes the measure of a person isn't whether they make the right choice, but whether they're willing to live with the consequences of their choices. The second challenge was more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. He found himself reliving moments from his own past. Every failure, every moment of weakness, every time he had fallen short of his own ideals. The collective consciousness of Zephyria seemed to be testing whether he could face his own imperfections without being destroyed by them. Marcus had always been his own harshest critic, carrying guilt from decisions made in the heat of battle, relationships that had failed, and chances not taken. But as he experienced these memories through the lens of Zephyrian collective wisdom, he began to understand something profound. Perfection was not the goal. Growth was. The ability to learn from mistakes, to become better while accepting that better was not the same as perfect. The third challenge was the most unexpected of all. Instead of facing some great spiritual test or cosmic revelation, Marcus found himself back in the crystal gardens where he had first overheard Princess Lyralei's casual wager. But this time, he experienced the scene from her perspective. Through the collective consciousness, he felt her boredom, her loneliness, her frustration with a life that had been planned out for her since birth. He experienced her genuine surprise at his performance in the trials, her growing respect for his character, and, most surprisingly, her dawning realization that her thoughtless jest had potentially bound her to someone she was beginning to care about far more than she had expected. But more than that, he felt the deeper truth that the collective consciousness wanted him to understand. The trials had never been about proving worthiness to marry the princess. They had been about proving worthiness to stand as equals with the Zephyrian people, to be accepted not as a curiosity or a primitive seeking advancement, but as a being capable of true partnership. As the connection to the collective consciousness began to fade, Marcus found himself back in the chamber looking up at Princess Lyralei and High Priest Valdris. Both were staring at him with expressions of amazement. "Remarkable," Valdris whispered. "In 3,000 years of administering these trials, I have never seen a consciousness integrate so completely with our collective wisdom while maintaining its individual identity. Captain Chen, you have not just passed the trial of spirit, you have achieved something that our greatest spiritual leaders spend lifetimes seeking." Princess Lyralei knelt beside the platform, her silver eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. "What did you experience?" she asked softly. Marcus sat up slowly, still processing the profound connection he had felt to an entire civilization's accumulated wisdom. "I experienced truth, Your Highness, about myself, about your people, and about what these trials were really designed to accomplish." He stood and faced her directly, his voice formal, but his eyes warm. "Princess Lyralei of the First House of Zephyria, I have completed the 3 trials as requested. I have proven my worth through mind, body, and spirit, and now I claim the boon you promised, your hand in marriage." The chamber fell silent. Lyralei's face went through a complex series of expressions: surprise, realization, and something that might have been relief. "Captain Chen," she said finally, "you realize that accepting such a boon would mean leaving your people, joining the Zephyrian nobility, and spending your life in a role for which you have no training or preparation?" Marcus smiled, the same calm, confident expression he had worn throughout the trials. "Your Highness, with respect, I think you may have misunderstood something fundamental about these trials. They weren't designed to test whether I was worthy of joining your people. They were designed to test whether I was worthy of true partnership with them. He gestured toward High Priest Valdris, who was nodding approvingly. The collective consciousness showed me the truth. These trials were created during a time when Zephyria needed allies who could stand as equals, not subjects seeking elevation. The princess who swore to marry whoever completed the trials wasn't making a thoughtless wager. She was invoking an ancient treaty protocol designed to formalize alliance between equals. Princess Lyrale's mouth fell open as she realized the implications of what he was saying. You mean? I mean that completing the trials doesn't just earn me the right to marry you, Your Highness. It establishes humanity as a formal ally of the Zephyrian Empire, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The marriage itself is symbolic, a joining of our peoples, not just our persons. High Priest Valdris began to laugh, a sound like distant thunder filled with joy. Oh, this is perfect. Princess, do you realize what has happened? This human has not only completed the trials, he has understood their true purpose better than anyone in the past 1,000 years. As the implications sank in, Princess Lyrale began to smile. Not the cruel, amused expression Marcus had first seen, but something genuine and warm. Captain Chen, she said, rising to her feet and extending her hand. It seems I have been outmaneuvered by someone who understood the game better than I did myself. Marcus took her hand, noting how her fingers trembled slightly, whether from excitement, nervousness, or something else entirely he couldn't tell. Your Highness, if I may be so bold, I don't think either of us was playing a game. I think we were both discovering something we didn't expect to find. News of Marcus's successful completion of the trial spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communicators and diplomatic channels to every major species and governing body. Within hours of his victory, the Zephyrian palace was flooded with requests for audiences, trade negotiations, and formal communications from governments that had previously dismissed humanity as an insignificant newcomer species. But Marcus was oblivious to the political earthquake he had triggered. He was sitting in the palace's private dining chamber with Princess Lyrale, sharing what she had laughingly called the most diplomatically significant meal in galactic history. The formal announcement of their engagement and the alliance it represented would be made at the evening celebration, but for now they had a few hours of relative privacy to actually get to know each other. I have to admit, Lyrale said, delicately sampling a dish that Marcus's enhanced digestion could barely handle. When I made that wager 3 days ago, I was being deliberately cruel. I wanted to humiliate not just you, but your entire species, as a warning to others who might presume to court above their station. Marcus nodded, cutting into something that resembled meat but glowed faintly blue. I know. I heard the entire conversation from the visitor's alcove. My military enhancements include enhanced hearing. It comes in handy during diplomatic negotiations. The princess nearly choked on her food. You heard. You knew from the beginning that I was mocking you. Oh yes, Marcus replied cheerfully. You were quite thorough in your disdain. Something about primitive beings with audacious presumptions, if I recall correctly. Lyrale's iridescent skin flushed a deep purple, apparently the Zephyrian equivalent of a blush. I am mortified, and you still chose to attempt the trials, knowing that I viewed you with such contempt. Marcus set down his utensils and leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the same careful attention he had given to the trials themselves. Your Highness, Lyrale, may I speak frankly? After everything that has happened, I think formality is somewhat pointless, she replied. Please speak freely. I didn't attempt the trials to win your hand in marriage. I attempted them to prove that humanity deserves respect on the galactic stage. Your personal opinion of me, while obviously important now, was secondary to the larger goal. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued by the challenge you represented. What kind of challenge? Marcus smiled, and Lyrale was struck by how much warmth the expression contained. You're brilliant, powerful, beautiful, and completely convinced of your own superiority. You've been surrounded by people who either fear you or want something from you for your entire life. Getting past those defenses to see the real person underneath? That's the kind of challenge I find irresistible. The princess stared at him for a long moment, her silver eyes reflecting depths of emotion he was only beginning to understand. And what do you think you found? Underneath the defenses, I mean. Someone who's as lonely as she is powerful, Marcus replied without hesitation. Someone who's tired of being treated like a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. Someone who made a cruel wager because she was bored and frustrated, but who spent the last 3 days discovering that she's capable of genuinely caring about someone she initially dismissed. Lorelai's breath caught, and for a moment, Marcus saw not the imperial princess but the woman beneath, vulnerable, surprised by her own emotions, and perhaps a little afraid of what she was feeling. "You see too much?" she whispered. "It's one of my less charming qualities," Marcus admitted. "But it's also why I was able to complete the trials. They weren't really tests of capability, they were tests of perception. The ability to see what was actually happening rather than what appeared to be happening." Before Lorelai could respond, the chamber doors opened and High Priest Valdris entered, followed by what appeared to be half the Zephyrian High Command. Their expressions ranged from amazement to concern to barely contained excitement. "Princess, Captain Chen," Valdris announced, "we have a situation that requires immediate attention. The completion of the trials has triggered consequences that we did not anticipate." Marcus and Lorelai exchanged glances. "What kind of consequences?" the princess asked. General Thexus, a massive Zephyrian with 4 arms and natural armor, plating, stepped forward. "Your Highness, the ancient protocols embedded in the trial system have been activated. Captain Chen's success has automatically initiated the rite of species elevation. Humanity has been granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all associated rights and territories." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Full membership in the Galactic Council wasn't just a political achievement. It was the difference between humanity being a minor species struggling for recognition and becoming one of the galaxy's major powers overnight. "Furthermore," General Thexus continued, "the Marriage Alliance Protocol has been invoked. This means that not only will Captain Chen marry Princess Lorelai, but humanity and Zephyria will be bound by the most comprehensive alliance treaty in galactic history. Our militaries, our economies, our technological development, everything will be shared between our species." Lorelai stood slowly, her face pale. "Valdris, are you telling me that my thoughtless wager has just restructured galactic politics?" The High Priest nodded gravely. "The ancient protocols were designed during the expansion wars, when Zephyria desperately needed allies who could stand as equals. The trials were never meant to be ceremonial. They were meant to identify species worthy of full partnership. Captain Chen's success has activated treaties that have been dormant for millennia." Marcus found himself laughing, not from humor but from the sheer overwhelming magnitude of what had just been revealed. "So let me understand this correctly. I came here to prove that humanity deserves respect. Instead, I've accidentally triggered a series of ancient protocols that have made humanity one of the galaxy's major powers and bound our species to yours in an alliance that will reshape interstellar politics for generations to come." "That is substantially correct," Valdris confirmed. Lorelai sank back into her chair, staring at Marcus with an expression somewhere between awe and terror. "What have we done?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt despite everything that had changed between them in the past few minutes. "We've proven that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about giving people exactly what they need, even when it's not what they thought they wanted." "But Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time, "do you realize what this means? You're not just agreeing to marry me. You're agreeing to help lead a galactic alliance. You'll be responsible for the welfare of billions of beings across dozens of star systems. Are you prepared for that kind of responsibility?" Marcus squeezed her hand gently, his dark eyes steady and calm. Lyra, I've spent my entire adult life preparing for challenges I never saw coming. 3 days ago, I was a diplomatic captain trying to prove humanity's worth. Today I'm apparently about to become your consort and help reshape galactic civilization. If I've learned anything from the trials, it's that the universe has a way of preparing us for exactly the challenges we need to face. He stood, still, holding her hand and addressed the assembled Zephyrian leadership. Gentlemen, ladies, honored beings, I accept the responsibilities that come with completing the trials. Humanity will honor the Alliance protocols, and I will do everything in my power to prove worthy of the trust you're placing in me. As the implications of his words sank in, the chamber erupted in discussion as various officials began planning for the massive changes that would need to be implemented, but Marcus only had eyes for Lyra, who was looking at him with an expression he had never seen before, not just respect or attraction, but something deeper and more complex. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly, her voice barely audible, over the excited conversations around them. Once the formal announcements are made, there will be no going back. You'll be bound to me, to my people, for the rest of your life. Marcus lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that somehow managed to be both courtly and intimate. Lyra, 3 days ago you joked that you'd marry me if I survived the trials. Today I'm telling you that surviving the trials was the easy part, the real challenge. Building a life together, forging an alliance between our peoples, reshaping the galaxy. That's what I'm truly looking forward to. The princess smiled then, the same genuine warmth he had seen earlier but magnified tenfold. In that case, Marcus Chen of Earth, I suppose we should start planning the most politically significant wedding in galactic history. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony, watching as the twin suns of Zephyria rose over the capital city. The past half-year had been a whirlwind of political negotiations, cultural exchanges, and the complex logistics of merging two completely different civilizations into a functioning alliance. The wedding had indeed been the most politically significant event in recent galactic history. Representatives from every major species had attended, and the ceremony itself had been broadcast across the galaxy. But for all the pomp and circumstance, Marcus's strongest memory of the day was the moment when Lyra had whispered to him during the vows, "I never expected to actually fall in love with you, you know." "Neither did I," he had whispered back, "but I suppose the universe knows what it's doing." Now, as he prepared for another day of alliance negotiations and cultural integration meetings, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He was no longer just Captain Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. He was Prince Consort Marcus of Zephyria, co-architect of the Human-Zephyrian Alliance, and one of the most influential political figures in the galaxy. "You're up early," Lyra's voice came from behind him, warm with the intimacy that had developed between them over the months. She joined him at the observation window, her presence as natural to him now as breathing. "Old military habits," Marcus replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Besides, we have the trade delegation from the hegemony arriving today, and I wanted to review the latest economic projections." Lyra laughed, the sound as musical as ever but now filled with genuine affection rather than cruel amusement. "6 months ago you were a simple diplomatic captain. Now you're analyzing economic projections for multi-system trade agreements. Sometimes I wonder if you were always this adaptable, or if the trials changed you somehow." Marcus considered the question seriously. It was something he had wondered about himself. How much of his success was due to capabilities he had always possessed, and how much was the result of the profound experience of connecting with the Zephyrian collective consciousness. "I think," he said finally, "that the trials didn't change who I was so much as they revealed who I had the potential to become. The collective consciousness showed me that growth isn't about becoming someone different, it's about becoming more fully yourself." "And who are you, Marcus Chen?" Lyra asked, turning in his arms to face him directly. "When you strip away all the titles and responsibilities and political implications, who is the man I married?" Marcus smiled, the same calm, confident expression that had carried him through the trials. I'm someone who refuses to accept limitations imposed by others. Someone who believes that the impossible is just another word for challenge accepted. And someone who fell in love with an alien princess who thought she was making a joke about marrying a primitive human. Lyrale's silver eyes sparkled with mirth. That joke certainly backfired spectacularly, didn't it? Did it? Marcus asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like that joke gave us exactly what we both needed, just not in the way either of us expected. Before Lyrale could respond, their private communication system chimed with an incoming message. The voice that emerged belonged to Admiral Rodriguez, Marcus's former commanding officer and now the official liaison between Earth and the Alliance. Marcus, Lyrale, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. 3 more species have formally requested to undergo the trials for Alliance membership. Apparently, word has spread that the trials are achievable for those who approach them correctly. Marcus and Lyrale exchanged glances, both recognizing the implications immediately. The trials had been designed for a specific historical purpose, but Marcus's success had demonstrated that they could serve a new function in the modern galaxy. A way for species to prove their worthiness for full partnership rather than mere client status. Which species? Lyrale asked. The Crystari Confederation, the nomadic fleets of Zerion, and, this is the interesting one, a delegation representing Earth's other colonies that want to establish their independence from the Terran government, while maintaining Alliance status. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus realized that what had begun as a personal challenge to prove humanity's worth had evolved into something much larger, a new model for how species could interact in the galaxy, based on mutual respect and proven capability rather than historical accidents of power and technology. Admiral, Marcus said finally, please inform all 3 delegations that their request will be considered, but they should understand that the trials are not ceremonial. They are genuine tests of mind, body, and spirit that will push them to their absolute limits. Understood. Also, Marcus, I have to ask, any regrets about how this all turned out? You could have been commanding your own diplomatic mission by now, maybe even making admiral yourself. Instead, you're helping to reshape galactic civilization. Marcus looked at Lyrale, taking in her amused expression and the way the morning light caught the iridescent patterns in her skin. He thought about the past 6 months, the challenges they had faced together, the moments of frustration and breakthrough, the gradual development of something that had started as political necessity and evolved into genuine partnership and love. Admiral, he said, I can honestly say that I have never been exactly where I was supposed to be more than I am right now. After the communication ended, Lyrale studied his face with the intensity that had first intrigued him. Do you really mean that? No regrets about the path not taken? Marcus pulled her closer, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit in his arms despite the differences in their species. Lyrale, 6 months ago you joked that you'd marry me if I survived the trials. You thought you were making an impossible wager with guaranteed entertainment value. Instead, you offered me the chance to prove not just my own worth, but humanity's place in the galaxy. He gestured toward the window, where the bustling activity of the Alliance headquarters was visible in the distance. Look what we've built together. 3 species have requested trial membership. The galactic economy has stabilized for the first time in decades, and we've established a new model for interspecies cooperation based on merit, rather than might. And personally? She asked quietly. Marcus smiled and kissed her forehead gently. Personally, I got to marry the most fascinating woman in the galaxy, who challenges me every single day to be better than I thought possible. Even if the trials had failed, even if the Alliance had never formed, getting to know you, the real you, not the imperial princess but the brilliant, complex, occasionally impossible woman beneath, that alone would have made everything worthwhile. Lyrale's response was interrupted by the arrival of their daily briefing materials, delivered by an aide who still seemed slightly amazed to see a human and a Zephyrian working so seamlessly together. As they reviewed the day's schedule, trade negotiations, cultural integration meetings, and a formal ceremony to welcome the newest member species to the Alliance, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this point. A cruel joke about marriage had become a genuine partnership. A challenge designed to humble humanity had elevated them to galactic prominence. And two beings from completely different worlds had discovered that sometimes the most impossible things were simply waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to attempt them. Marcus, Lyrelei said as they prepared to begin another day of reshaping the galaxy, I have to ask, what do you think would have happened if you had failed the trials? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think, he said finally, that failure was never really an option. Not because I'm particularly special, but because the trials themselves were designed to reveal truth rather than test capability. The truth was that humanity deserved a place at the galactic table, that our species had something valuable to contribute, and that sometimes the most important alliances are forged not through conquest or negotiation, but through the simple act of proving that you're worthy of respect. He paused, smiling at a memory. Besides, I had an advantage that previous challengers didn't have. What advantage? Marcus's smile widened into a grin. I had a princess who was absolutely convinced I would fail, and I've always been particularly motivated by people telling me something is impossible. As they walked together toward another day of challenges and opportunities, Lyrelei realized that her casual jest 6 months ago had indeed backfired, but in the most wonderful way possible. She had thought she was making an impossible wager. Instead, she had offered the universe an opportunity to prove that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest challenges. And Marcus Chen, the unremarkable human diplomat, who had refused to accept his species' limitations, had accepted her challenge and changed the galaxy in the process. The trials of Zephyria would continue, other species would attempt them, and the alliance would grow and evolve. But it had all begun with a princess who thought she was making a joke and a human who decided to take her seriously. Sometimes, Marcus reflected as they entered the briefing room to begin another day of impossible tasks, the universe really did have a sense of humor. It just wasn't always the kind of humor people expected.